On this show so far, I've been attempting to highlight many different avenues of fantasy films in an attempt to show how widespread the umbrella term is, and how it can encompass films that maybe you never realized were fantasy movies. However, there's one avenue that I've been neglecting thus far, and you'll see why shortly. But before we do, you'll need a brief history lesson. Before we had The Lord of the Rings for every movie to mimic, many fantasy movies aspired to be like Conan the Barbarian. In 1982, an adaptation of Robert E. Howard's sword and sorcery pulp stories was made, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger as Conan the Barbarian, and proved to not only be a huge success, but also one of the most influential and successful fantasy films in decades. It catapulted Arnold Schwarzenegger's early career into a leading action star. And it was the movie especially that forever ingrained the trope of the muscular sword-wielding, loincloth-wearing barbarian warrior into popular culture. Conan's success made studios big and small smell money, and this led to a wave of sword and sorcery films in the 1980s, launching the sword and sorcery genre, or as I like to call them, Conan-sploitation movies. Red Sonja, Krull, Beastmaster, Masters of the Universe, Your Hunter from the Future, The Warrior and the Sorceress, Barbarian Queen, The Barbarians. You get the idea. Nearly all of these movies feature elements directly lifted from Conan the Barbarian. They also tended to be low budget with cheap effects, terrible choreography, and poor acting. The bulk of them are also overtly sexual, rife with nude buxom women, and also intensely homoerotic, featuring a lot of glamour shots of muscular, oiled-up men that linger on certain features quite extensively. They even usually lift the rags and wasteland aesthetic of Conan the Barbarian as well. These are the kind of movies that the band Manowar emulate. For a prime example of this wacky subgenre of fantasy movies, we need look no further than 1983's Deathstalker. Deathstalker tells the tale of our titular hero, an outlaw who quests for a magic sword so that he can defeat the evil wizard Munkar and rescue a princess. Yeah, that's it. First off, let's stress this right away. The Deathstalker is not a good movie. Its effects are cheap, its acting is poor, its plot is rushed and makes zero sense, it treats its main character like a god impervious to any threat, and it's exploitative in its gratuitous use of sex and nudity. I mean, come on, our female lead is topless for the majority of her on-screen appearances, and our titular hero beds her within 5 minutes of meeting her. When the feminists like to prattle on about male power fantasies, this is pretty much what they mean in movie form. But let's put the obnoxious critical theory aside and look at the film on its own merit. The real crime of Deathstalker is that there is potential buried in its soulless husk that it never capitalizes on and could separate it from the movie it rips off. For one, it actually features monsters, which is something Conan the Barbarian rather lacks. Deathstalker, the character, goes toe-to-toe with creatures such as a cave-dwelling giant, goblin-like wild men, and even a pig-headed warrior reminiscent of the classic early 80s Dungeons & Dragons orcs. However, all of these fights are short, silly, and the effects make them look extremely goofy. Another thing is that the large amount of the plot centers on a tournament, which is something different than the usual quest, rescue, and revenge stories that most of these movies have. However, most of the tournament is left to terribly cut montages that our main character doesn't even participate in. And lastly, and this is a touch spoilerish now, the film builds up a character similar to our main hero, a skilled warrior and a match for our hero, who befriends Deathstalker and becomes his companion. And the movie starts to build towards a climax where they'll have to face off against each other in the tournament, but that never really comes into fruition. Instead, the movie opts for a lame cop-out twist. It would have been different than many of these other movies where our hero is an unmatched god for the entire movie, but alas, Deathstalker also follows suit. If Deathstalker had any merit, it's that it's one of the better Conan-sploitation movies, but even then it's mediocre at best, and I can't even pretend that it's a so bad it's good movie. Mind-boggling as it is, Deathstalker was successful enough that it earned not one, not two, but 3 sequels, made between 1987 and 1990. The sequels, as you can imagine, are even worse in terms of quality, budget, and sexual gratuity. In fact, they all went straight to video. If you wanted to watch Deathstalker, and I don't know why you would, It is free on Amazon Prime, and it doesn't look like it's going anywhere anytime soon. Nowadays, the era of Conan-sploitation is far in the past, and Conan the Barbarian's influence has started to wane and is overshadowed by more current works, to the point that its remake hilariously ditches most of what made the original film great, but that's a review for another day. Instead, the Conan-sploitation movies are destined to fade into obscurity. Footnotes in cinema history, and Deathstalker is no exception. There will come a day in the years to come when barbarian-themed movies will rise again, but when they do, I guarantee Deathstalker will not be on the remake list.